G'day legends, I hope that you're doing really well. Now today's going to be a bit of a different video, and I want to talk about something that I've thought about and wrestled with a lot in my time doing this job. Now, my background is I'm a soldier, and that's the way I sort of identify myself anyways. I spent many years soldiering in the infantry, deployed to Afghanistan, whatever from there. And I've stepped into a new industry of being war reporting, war journalism, like I'm doing now. And it's 04 in the morning, and you can still see behind me, right behind me, 600 metres away, is the fence line that borders Israel and Gaza. And what we've seen happen here in Sderot was horrible. A month ago from today, we saw hundreds of people cross over into just this area alone, but thousands cross, and well over 1,000 also lose their lives. But since then, we've also seen thousands into potentially the tens of thousands lose their lives behind me in Gaza. And my job as a war journalist is somewhat of profiting, I guess, on that suffering. And what I want to talk about is how do I sort of sell that, I guess, to myself, and how do I come to terms with that? Now, firstly, I want to say that I haven't ever fully come to terms with doing that. There's this sense of guilt every time I film something like this. At the end of the day, my business is this. But I do believe that what journalists do at the front line is an incredibly important job. And I didn't get this while I was in the army. I would have never thought that it was impossible, of how that story is told, and also giving a voice to sometimes the voiceless. Now, there are more ethical ways and less ethical ways, I guess, to do it. And I feel the most guilty when I'm doing reporting on war from back home in the comfort of my home in Australia, rather than sitting here, I guess, somewhat in the elements and somewhat putting myself in danger. Only just before I was down on my belly in the dirt from incoming rockets. So I sort of feel on that way, you're being in the field, at least you're exposed to some more risk. But I think the most way I try and get rid of some of this guilt, and I do still feel very guilty about what I do, is that this is going to happen regardless. Whether I am here or not here, whether my camera is on or if it is off, I have no influence on how this is going to go or on what has happened. Now, there is an incredible sense of guilt when you are filming someone who is dead on the ground. That was someone's mother or someone's father or someone's brother or sister or their kid. It's horrible. And filming that, when you first film that for the first time, when you film a deceased body, it is like, this is so wrong. And it's still, trust me, it does feel wrong doing it. And that is something that's why those images that I have, I've never actually released. Is I don't think that for at least what I do, adds anything to it. Although it can do to show the actual image of how brutal things are. But it is guilt. But what I was getting at was that it's not going to change the circumstances. But I guess the way I mostly work is interviewing people long form. And sometimes I will give a voice, I guess, to the voiceless and share how I see what is going on. Now, is it ethical to profit off war? No. Are the journalists the least ethical people doing it? Absolutely not. Just take a quick look at the private defence sector who, make billions, not in the hundreds or thousands of dollars. There's not that much money in war reporting, especially as an independent. But that is sort of the way I sell it to myself, is that this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to change. You are not going to change what has happened or the outcome, but I have the ability to show the world what has happened to people and what is happening. And the truth is very important. And that's why I believe sometimes when journalists turn away from a story or sharing something because it doesn't fit the narrative, and I've seen this many, many times, not reporting on something because it doesn't fit the narrative of their channel or their investors, or just the narrative that won't get them a lot of hate online. I think that is when it becomes unethical, because then you're lying. You're not telling the truth. Turning a blind eye to something even though you know it's true, not reporting it. I believe that is when journalism becomes unethical, and that is doing wrong by the people on two sides of a war that have lost their lives or are suffering in this. But it is horrible, and I don't think that I'll ever truly come to terms with I guess, how I conduct business. I think I do it as ethically as possible, but at the same time, it is very hard. But I think as long as you're respectful, you clean up your rubbish, little bits and pieces like that. Like, there's been a lot of journalists here, and there's just rubbish everywhere. You tell the truth to the best of your ability, and you're respectful for both sides in the conflict, and you try and remain as neutral. In my belief, a journalist is a neutral observer, and you are telling people what you see as the truth and what is happening on the ground. You haven't picked a side. You haven't done this. Now, not being biased is impossible, but as you are showing the world what has happened, and I believe that is so important, because so many lives, so many stories, so much everything have been lost to war in the past that will never be told. So many stories have never been told, from young people dying through to fathers, mothers, children. It's horrible, and war should be avoided. And I wish that I was out of work. I wish my job didn't exist. That would be the best. But sadly, it does, and it's going to get more. There's not going to be less. It's going to increase more and more. But at least, I know I may have waffled a bit, but that is how I come, I guess, to terms with the underlying guilt of how I make my living. How I make my living off the death and suffering of other people. And I think journalists need to remember that that is how they make their living in this job. And that when you go back, I'm driving home now, and I'm going back and lie in a comfortable bed and get McDonald's nuggets on the way home because I'm an hour away, that, well, the money I just made off this was off these shells dropping behind me. Each shell, people are losing their lives, and innocent people are caught in, for me to go home and do that. So I think you need to be realistic about what you are actually filming as well, but also be cognizant of how people have coping mechanisms with it as well. And that's why you may see people drink or laugh or things like this of coping. But I think I just wanted to put this out there, if that's how I deal with it, but how I probably don't deal with it too well either, that I'm still very caught up in it, and I do feel an immense amount of guilt for some of the things that I have filmed and told and made money on. But this job will continue, and I do believe this job is incredibly important. I didn't think it back in the day, and I always wondered how people did this, but I think it is incredibly important, because otherwise it wouldn't be told. It wouldn't be told of what has happened and the individual soldiers and what is happening. But I just hate it when people are blatantly lying about things that are happening, or only reporting one truth. Horrible things happened right where I'm standing. There's still blood, bullets, there's shell marks over here. But there's a massacre happening behind me also. It's shocking. But I hope that you guys are all doing well. I hope that you can see, I guess, eye to eye with me, or can at least see where I'm coming from. So thank you guys very much, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.